The dragon princess sat alone in the cold metal room. The walls of the old space station were gray and dull, and the lights flickered every few seconds. She pressed her wings close to her body, trying to keep warm. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She had learned long ago that hunger was a quiet companion. It was better to pretend it did not exist than to feel it constantly. Outside, the galaxy moved on. Ships passed by, soldiers patrolled, and merchants bargained for rare goods. But no one came for her. No one cared that she was trapped here. She was the youngest daughter of a powerful dragon emperor, once the pride of the empire. But the empire had fallen. Betrayals, wars, and politics had left her forgotten. Even her older siblings had abandoned her, worried only about their own survival. Now she existed in the shadows, a ghost of her former life. The princess looked at the small window above the floor. Through it she could see the stars stretching endlessly. She remembered flying among them as a young hatchling, her mother guiding her through the constellations. That memory felt like a dream now, far away and impossible to reach. Her scales, once shiny and strong, were dull and scratched. Her claws were chipped. She had not bathed in weeks, not because she did not want to, but because no one brought water. No one brought anything. She had tried to survive before, hiding from the few who came near the station. She had ration scraps left in the storage rooms. But today her body was weaker. Her wings ached when she moved. Her throat felt dry and she could taste nothing but metal and dust. She had lost hope. Hope had been the cruelest enemy. It reminded her of what she had once had and what she had now lost. A sound echoed in the hallway. A soft clanging, followed by muted footsteps. The princess froze, her golden eyes wide and alert. She had not expected anyone. The station was supposed to be empty. She pressed herself against the far wall, hoping whoever it was would pass without noticing her. But the sound grew closer and the footsteps slowed. Then the door to her room opened. A human stepped in. He was tall, with dark hair tied back and a small child holding his hand. The princess blinked. Humans were not uncommon in dragon space, but few dared to approach a royal station without orders. Even fewer would enter without weapons. The human had nothing except a small box in his other hand. The princess watched him silently. She wanted to roar, to demand he leave. But her voice was weak. She barely had the strength to lift her head. The human did not speak harshly. Instead, he knelt on the floor and opened the box. The smell hit her before she even understood it. Warm bread. Roasted vegetables. A small stew that bubbled gently. Her stomach twisted in surprise. She had smelled food before, but never like this. Never made for her. The human looked up at her, his eyes calm. "You look hungry," he said softly. "I made this. You don't have to eat it if you don't want to, but it's here." The princess's wings trembled. She had expected fear, anger, or orders. Not kindness. She had forgotten what kindness felt like. Her claws dug into the floor as she stepped closer, drawn by the smell. Her golden eyes lowered to the stew, then back to the human. I cannot," she whispered. "You can," the human replied simply. "No one is asking you to fight. No one is asking for anything from you. Just eat." The princess hesitated. Her pride, her sense of duty, her old lessons screamed at her to refuse. She should not accept food from a human, especially not one who did not bow or tremble before her. But her stomach roared louder than her pride. Her wings drooped. She looked at the small child beside the human, who offered a shy smile. The child had nothing and yet he shared. Somehow, this human and his child had more courage than the soldiers who had abandoned her. She knelt slowly, lowering her head toward the food. The smell made her dizzy. She took a small taste, then another. Warmth spread through her chest, through her wings, through her claws. It was more than just food. It was comfort. It was a feeling she had not known in months. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry in front of a human. The human watched quietly, making no sound, giving her space. He stirred the stew gently, checking the bread. The princess realized that he did not expect anything in return. No respect, no titles, no payment. Only the act of giving. It was strange, unfamiliar. And yet, it was exactly what she needed. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. The flavors were strange and wonderful. Sweet, salty, soft, and warm. Her stomach, which had been a hollow pit for so long, began to feel full, alive. She lifted her head and met the human's eyes. Why are you doing this?" she asked. The human smiled faintly. "Because someone would do it for my child. And I want to do the same for you." The princess could not answer. She did not know if she could. No one had ever said anything like that to her. She had only known commands, orders, and fear. And now, here was someone who acted with no expectation, no demand, no law forcing him. Only kindness. The small child reached out, offering her a piece of bread. The princess's claws shook as she took it. The warmth of it in her hands made her feel safe. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that someone cared, even if only a little. Outside, the galaxy continued its endless spin. Ships passed silently, unaware of the dragon princess who sat in a small station, eating her first real meal in weeks. And for the first time she felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know if the Empire would call her back or if she would remain forgotten. But for now, in this small room with a human single father and his child, she was alive. She was full. And she was no longer completely alone. For the first time, she imagined that maybe someone, somewhere, had not abandoned her entirely. Maybe hope had only been waiting for a simple meal, a simple act of care, to return. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to live again. The human father did not leave the station that day. After seeing the dragon princess eat, he quietly cleaned the small mess she had made. His child watched from the corner, curious but silent, sensing the strange tension in the room. The human could feel it too, though he did not fully understand what it was. Something about this dragon, so young yet so tired, told him she had been through more than any creature should. He had worked with humans for years, repairing ships, fixing engines, and solving problems that others ignored. He had learned to notice small signs, quiet details that most people missed. And now, standing before the dragon princess, those instincts screamed. She was not just hungry. She was broken. Her wings were bruised and ragged in places where no one should have ever touched her. Her claws were worn down from scratching at the cold metal floors. Her scales were dusty, and faint scratches marred the shining patterns that once marked her as royalty. She had not spoken much, only whispering when she had to, and even then, her words were soft and hesitant. The human crouched a little closer. "You don't have to hide," he said. His voice was calm, steady, carrying no fear or judgment. "I can help." The princess flinched. She had heard promises like that before, from soldiers and nobles, and none had ever kept them. She looked away, her golden eyes scanning the ceiling. Why do you care?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I would want someone to care for my child if they were in your place," he replied simply. He thought of his own little boy at home, alone while he worked long shifts in space. He would hope that someone, anyone, would notice if his child was in pain or danger. The princess swallowed hard. She had been alone for so long that she could not remember the last time someone had spoken to her without fear or command. Humans were strange creatures. They were small, fragile, and short-lived compared to dragons. But sometimes they saw things differently. Sometimes they did things that mattered more than power or gold. The human noticed her trembling. It was subtle, but it was there. Her hands shook when she moved them. Her shoulders were stiff, tense, as if expecting someone to strike her. Her breathing was shallow, careful, as though she feared taking up too much space in the air. These were signs that most people would ignore, but he saw them clearly. "You don't have to do anything right now," he said softly. "Just sit, rest, eat when you want. I'll be here." The princess hesitated. Pride and caution warred inside her. She wanted to retreat, to curl back into her corner and pretend the human was not there. But she was tired of hiding, tired of hunger, tired of pretending. Slowly, she lowered herself to the floor again, keeping her wings folded tightly. She watched him, unsure, curious, and wary all at once. The human opened a small bag he had brought and began to prepare another meal. It was simple: water, boiled grains, a few vegetables, and some protein he had preserved for long space trips. But he cooked carefully, gently, as if every movement mattered. The princess watched the steam rise, watched the hands move, watched the care in each motion. It was strange for her. Dragons were served, not fed. They were expected to accept what was given and complain silently if it was not enough. But this human was not just giving her food. He was showing her attention. Her curiosity grew. She inched closer, nose twitching at the aroma. It was warm, comforting, and strangely familiar. For the first time in weeks, her stomach responded not with pain or emptiness, but with hope. She did not move forward immediately, but she stayed, watching, listening, learning. The human spoke quietly as he worked. "Cooking is simple if you care. It takes time, yes, but it also tells someone they are not alone." He glanced at the princess, careful not to startle her. "I learned this after my wife died. I had to care for my child, and food was one way I could show love. I can do the same for you." The princess felt something stir inside her chest. It It was foreign, strange, and unsettling. A part of her wanted to reject it, to guard herself against disappointment. But another part, a smaller, softer part, wanted to believe. To trust even a little. She sat on her haunches, her wings still tight but less tense. She did not speak. She only watched. The human noticed and smiled faintly. He placed a small plate of food in front of her. Not demanding, not expecting. Just giving. Her golden eyes widened as she saw the portions. Enough to fill her, enough to heal slowly, enough to remind her that someone noticed her suffering. Her claws hovered above the plate, unsure. Finally she touched the food, tasting it lightly. Warmth spread through her body. Her stomach, long empty, responded with a relief she had almost forgotten existed. The human stayed still, letting her eat. He did not rush her, did not comment, did not ask for thanks. He simply watched, silently recognizing the signs. The tremble in her claws, the hesitation in her movements, the way her eyes softened as she felt cared for. Hours passed, though they felt like minutes. The princess ate slowly, savoring each bite. The human father cleaned around her, spoke softly to his child, and made the space feel safe. For the first time in months, the princess allowed herself to relax. By the time the meal was done, she had moved closer to him, her wings loosening slightly. She dared a small, almost shy look at his face. "You notice things," she said, her voice barely audible. "I try," he replied, smiling faintly. "Some things are easy to miss. Some things are quiet. But they matter." The princess thought about this. Her entire life had been about power, titles, and ceremonies. No one had ever noticed the small signs, the trembling hands, the hollow gaze, the quiet ache in her chest. But this human had. And that simple act of noticing, of caring, had already begun to change something inside her. She felt a small spark of hope. Not yet courage, not yet trust, but hope. Hope that maybe she did not have to fade alone. Hope that someone could see her for who she really was. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a tomorrow where she was not just a forgotten princess, but someone who mattered, even to one small human and his child. Outside, the stars continued their silent path. The galaxy spun on, unaware of the dragon princess in the station, slowly learning that not all power comes from fear. Some comes from noticing, from caring, from the quiet acts that make a life worth living. And in that small metal room, a dragon princess began to feel that she might live again. The dragon princess sat quietly after finishing the meal, her claws still resting near the plate. She had never felt anything like this before. The warmth from the food spread through her body, but it was more than warmth. It was a feeling she could not name. Comfort. Safety. Perhaps even care. She blinked slowly, trying to understand it. For a creature used to fear, orders, and cold routines, this new feeling was confusing. The human father cleaned the plate and set it aside. He did not rush her, did not ask questions, did not expect gratitude. He simply sat on the floor a few meters away, watching her with quiet patience. His child curled near him, playing with a small toy but keeping one eye on the princess. It was a strange scene, a dragon princess, once royal and untouchable, and two humans, simple and ordinary, sitting together in silence. Finally the princess spoke, her voice soft and unsure. Why do you do this for me? I am nothing. Forgotten. Weak. The human looked at her calmly. I don't care about titles or power. I care about people. If someone is hungry, scared, or alone, I help. That is enough reason for me. He paused, then added, You are not nothing. You are alive and you are here. That is enough for me to act. The princess tilted her head, her golden eyes reflecting the small light in the room. No one had ever spoken to her this way. Everyone had demanded obedience, loyalty, or respect. Everyone had wanted something from her. But this human wanted nothing. Not gold. Not allegiance. Not a title. Just for her to be safe, to eat, to live. She tried to imagine the life of this human. Small, fragile, yet he had courage she could not measure. He had left his own world, his own responsibilities to help a stranger. A dragon. Someone the galaxy would call dangerous, powerful, untouchable. And yet he approached her with no fear, no judgment, only care. The princess felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked quickly, refusing to let them fall. Pride was a dragon's shield, but it could not hold back the truth of her hunger, of her need for care. She had lived in silence for so long that she had almost forgotten how it felt to be noticed, to be valued, to be cared for without reason. The human stirred gently as if he sensed her thoughts. Food is more than filling your stomach, he said quietly. It is a way to say you matter. You are seen. You are remembered. That is why I cook for you. Not because I have to, but because you are alive and that is enough." The princess lowered her head, considering his words. They were simple, yet they carried weight. Simple words, spoken calmly, could change a life. She had seen kingdoms fall, wars rage, dragons fight and die. Yet no words, no power, no ceremony had ever made her feel seen. And now, in a small room in a forgotten station, a human had done exactly that with nothing more than care and food. She lifted her head slowly, daring to meet his eyes. No one has ever cared like this," she whispered. The human shook his head gently. "I'm not the first. I won't be the last. But someone has to start. Someone has to notice. Someone has to care." The child beside him smiled shyly, offering a small piece of bread from earlier. The princess took it carefully, her claws trembling slightly. She chewed slowly, savoring not only the taste but the gesture. Someone had given this to her freely, without fear, without judgment, without expectation. And that was more than she had ever known. Time passed. They did not speak much, but they did not need to. The simple act of sharing space, of being present, was enough. The dragon princess felt her strength return, slowly but surely. Her wings, still folded, felt lighter. Her claws, still rough and scratched, seemed stronger. Her mind, foggy with hunger and fear, cleared a little with each bite, each gesture, each moment of quiet attention. By evening, the princess could not stop thinking. She thought of the humans she had known, rare, fleeting, always cautious. She thought of the dragons who had abandoned her, who had fought for power while leaving the young and weak to suffer. And she thought of this small human father and child, who had crossed the galaxy to give her food, to give her care, to give her hope. For the first time, she imagined a world where strength was measured not only in claws, fire, and wings, but in the willingness to act with care. Where courage was not only in battle but in kindness. Where life was not only about survival but about noticing, about seeing, about valuing. And in that world she could see herself, not as a forgotten princess, not as weak, not as lost, but as someone alive, someone remembered, someone capable of hope. The human noticed her staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. He did not speak. He knew better than to interrupt a mind at work. Instead, he offered a small cup of water and smiled faintly. The princess accepted it, drinking slowly. Each sip seemed to wash away not only thirst but the memory of fear, loneliness, and hunger. Night fell. The lights in the station flickered, and the stars outside seemed to shine brighter. The princess curled slightly, feeling a warmth she had almost forgotten. The meal had filled more than her stomach. It had filled her mind, her heart, her sense of self. It was more than food. It was a message, a gift, a proof that someone cared enough to notice. Finally she spoke again, her voice stronger, steadier. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the food alone, but for everything it represented. For the care, the patience, the attention, the recognition. Thank you, for seeing me." The human nodded, his eyes soft. "You're welcome. That is all I needed to do." The princess felt something stir inside her. A spark of courage. A hint of trust. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know if the galaxy would forgive her, if her empire would call her back, if she would ever return to her throne. But she knew one thing clearly: she could survive. She could hope. And she could believe, for the first time in a long while, that someone had chosen to see her not as a tool, not as a symbol, but as a living being. And in the silence of the station, with the stars outside and the quiet humans near, the dragon princess began to understand a simple truth. A meal could be more than food. Could be the start of a new life. The dragon princess slept lightly that night, her wings folded close, her body still warm from the meal. For the first time in months she did not dream of hunger, fear, or betrayal. Instead, she dreamed of the human father and his child, of quiet gestures, of simple acts that carried more power than any throne or army. She woke with the memory of warmth still inside her, and it gave her courage she had not felt in years. Morning came quietly. Light filtered through the small window, and the station hummed with life beyond her room. The human was already up, preparing a simple breakfast, and his child was humming softly as they arranged utensils. The princess watched from the corner, hesitant at first. She felt a strange sense of calm in their presence. For the first time she did not feel trapped. A sound from the communication console interrupted the morning. Red lights blinked, and a recorded voice announced a scheduled inspection. The princess stiffened. Dragon officials, soldiers, diplomats, all arriving to see if she had survived. She had imagined this moment many times, always expecting scorn, judgment, or punishment. She had prepared to hide, to retreat, to make herself invisible. The human noticed her tension. "They're coming," he said simply. "But whatever happens, you're ready?" The princess's claws dug lightly into the floor. "Ready?" she whispered. She was far from ready. She was weak compared to the officials outside. She had no allies, no weapons, no servants. And yet, she felt a spark of something she could not name. Strength? Courage? Perhaps hope. When the officials arrived, they were as expected, rigid, formal, and confident that she would obey without question. The eldest among them, a tall dragon with scales that glimmered like molten silver, stepped forward. His voice was sharp and commanding. "Princess," he said, "you have been found. Report immediately." The princess rose slowly, her wings stretching lightly as she faced them. She did not kneel. She did not lower her gaze. For the first time she felt the difference between fear and respect. Fear had ruled her life for months. But this human had shown her that courage could be quiet, gentle, and strong all at once. "I am here," she said, her voice clear, steady, and surprisingly calm. "And I have eaten. I have survived." The officials stiffened. One of them moved forward, intending to demand explanations, but stopped when he saw her posture, the glow in her golden eyes, and the calm presence of the humans near her. They had expected weakness, but instead they found strength. Not the kind they knew from armies or titles, but the kind that came from living, from enduring, from being cared for when no one else would. The human father stood quietly beside his child, holding a small tray of food. He did not speak unless spoken to, but the officials noticed him immediately. Some were confused. Some were wary. One whispered to another, "Why is a human here?" The princess ignored them. She spoke again, her voice firm. This human did not take orders. He did not demand titles. He only offered care. "And because of him, I am stronger than you see." Murmurs ran through the group. Dragons who had once been her teachers, her guards, her family were shocked. They had expected a frightened, obedient girl. Instead, they found someone who had learned to stand alone, someone who had survived because of trust and kindness rather than power. The eldest dragon stepped back, reconsidering his assumptions. "You speak boldly," he said. "For one so young." The princess lifted her head higher. "I speak because I have learned something important. Strength is not only in power. Courage is not only in battle. Life is not only in obedience. Sometimes, it is in small acts of care. Sometimes, it is in noticing someone who is forgotten." The officials looked at one another. Some understood immediately. Others struggled to accept it. But the princess's eyes did not waver. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer silent. The human father handed her a small piece of bread, and she took it without hesitation. It was a gesture, yes, but also a declaration. She was capable of receiving help, of trusting, of choosing her own path. The officials could do nothing but watch. One of the younger dragons stepped forward, his voice softer than the others. "Are you saying that we were wrong to abandon you?" The princess shook her head gently. "I do not blame you. I was forgotten because the galaxy moved on. But I am alive now, and I will live on my own terms. Because someone, a human, chose to care for me when no one else would." The words hung in the air. Silence filled the station. Outside, the galaxy spun, unaware of the small room where a young dragon had reclaimed her life not through fire, not through claws, but through trust and the gift of care. Finally, the eldest dragon spoke again. "It seems, the galaxy must notice new forms of strength. Perhaps we have underestimated humans, and perhaps we have underestimated the power of simple acts." The princess nodded. She did not smile yet, it was too early. But she felt a shift inside her. The fear that had held her down for months, the isolation that had seemed endless, the hunger that had nearly broken her, they were all being replaced with something new. Hope, courage, a sense that she could shape her own life. The human father watched quietly, proud but careful not to draw attention. He did not need recognition. The changes he had inspired were already happening in the princess. That was enough. The child peeked from behind him, eyes wide. "She's strong," the child whispered. "Yes," the human said softly. "Stronger than most would believe. But it is not just strength in claws or fire. It is strength in being alive, in trusting, in accepting care when it comes. That is courage too." The dragon princess looked around at the officials once more. She saw hesitation, surprise, and perhaps even respect. She realized that the galaxy, vast and cold, had begun to notice her, not because of power, not because of fear, but because she had chosen to survive, to trust, and to accept care. For the first time in a long time, she felt in control of her destiny. She had been left to fade, ignored by those who should have protected her, but she had survived. And now the galaxy could see it. The officials retreated slightly, unsure of what to do next. The princess stood tall, her wings stretching gently. She was not afraid. She was not alone. She had learned that life was not only about survival or power. It was about noticing, caring, and being cared for. And in that small moment, the dragon princess felt something powerful. She had begun to change the world, quietly, with nothing more than courage, choice, and a human who had shown her kindness. The dragon princess stood on the platform of the old station, looking out at the stars. They stretched endlessly, bright and silent, but she did not feel small. She felt alive. She had survived hunger, fear, and neglect. She had learned something the galaxy had not taught her. Humans were not weak and kindness was not weakness. Sometimes, small acts could change everything. The dragon officials had left, still unsure of how to respond to what they had seen. They had expected obedience, tears, or shame. Instead, they had seen a young dragon standing tall, filled with strength and dignity not born of titles or armies, but from trust, care, and courage. It was a lesson many would not forget. The human father and his child were packing to leave. They had been asked to stay longer, but they refused. Their work here was done. The dragon princess had learned to trust, to eat, to heal, and to hope. That was enough. She approached them, her wings folded neatly, her golden eyes steady. "Thank you," she said again, softly but firmly. "Not just for the meals, but for teaching me something no one else could. You showed me that life is worth more than fear and duty. That courage is more than fighting. That kindness can save a life." The human father smiled, his eyes gentle. "You did the hard part. You survived. You chose to live. I only helped you remember how." The princess nodded, her heart swelling. She felt a strange mixture of sadness and joy. Sadness because she would miss them, joy because she now understood a truth she would carry forever. Humans, small and fragile as they were, could teach dragons lessons that armies and crowns never could. Word of her survival and the humans helped spread slowly at first. Messengers carried the tale to other dragon stations, to the planets of the Empire, and finally to the new leaders. The story was simple. A young dragon princess had been abandoned, found by humans, and survived because of care, not force. At first, many dismissed it. Humans were fragile, unworthy of trust, or merely servants. But as reports continued, stories of her strength, her courage, and her voice, the Empire began to listen. The princess began to speak publicly, not as a child asking for help, but as a dragon who had learned. She spoke of trust, of courage, of the quiet acts that mattered more than battles. She spoke of the humans who had taught her that life was more than power. Her words were simple, yet they struck dragons in ways no command or law ever could. Dragons began to rethink their assumptions. They watched humans with new eyes, not as tools, not as weak labor, but as creatures capable of teaching lessons of patience, care, and courage. Young dragons began to cook for humans, share spaces, and learn from them. Slowly the empire changed. The princess herself made changes to dragon laws. She did not take vengeance, nor did she demand wealth or titles for the human father. Instead, she created spaces where humans and dragons could work together, share knowledge, and learn from one another. Cooking halls were built across the empire, inspired by the small acts of care she had received. Dragons learned that meals could carry meaning beyond hunger, that care could be a form of strength, and that life was worth more than obedience. Historians later wrote that the empire did not change because of fear, war, or rebellion. It changed because a dragon remembered care, because a human dared to act without expectation, and because the smallest acts could ripple across stars. Statues were not built of the human father, but his story was told in every hall, every classroom, every kitchen. His courage was simple, quiet, yet stronger than any army. The dragon princess often returned to the station where it had begun. She would sit by the small window watching the stars and remember the smell of bread and stew, the warmth of care, and the lesson that life was meant to be seen, cherished, and protected. She thought of the human father and his child, imagining them smiling across the galaxy, proud but unaware of the impact they had made. She realized that the galaxy was full of humans, each with their own acts of courage, patience, and care. Dragons had overlooked them for centuries, judging them by size, strength, and lifespan. Now she knew better. Humans were teachers in disguise, reminders that power was not only in fire or claws, but in seeing, caring, and choosing to act. Years later, young dragons approached her, curious and respectful. "How did you survive alone?" they would ask. She would smile and reply, "I was never truly alone. A human reminded me that life is precious, and that even the smallest act of care can change everything." And so, the Dragon Princess grew strong not because of armies or crowns, but because she remembered the quiet lessons of a human single father and his child. The empire shifted, slowly but surely, and dragons and humans began to live together in ways that no one had imagined possible. Trust replaced fear, care replaced command, and the galaxy slowly learned that even the smallest life, the simplest act, could carry the greatest strength. The princess looked at the stars and felt peace. The humans had left, but their lesson remained. She had learned to live, to trust, and to value life, not for titles, not for power, but because someone had chosen to care. And that lesson would ripple across generations. The dragons remembered. The humans were honored, not with gold or statues, but with the knowledge that they had changed an empire. And the galaxy knew that courage, kindness, and care could be stronger than fire and wings. The dragon princess smiled softly, folding her wings as she looked to the stars. She had been forgotten, abandoned, and hungry. Yet here she stood, alive and strong because a human had dared to cook a meal, and in doing so, had taught the galaxy what dragons could learn from humans. And in that quiet understanding the empire was changed forever.